July 17, 1944, Hampton Roads, Virginia. Fog rolled low across the water, thick enough to blur the lines between sea and sky. The USS General moved slowly through the gray veil, her steel hull humming with the weight of men who had seen too much of war. On her lower deck, behind reinforced iron bars, stood General Heinrich Foch, one of the highest-ranking German officers captured during the Allied push across Normandy. His uniform was worn from days of travel, yet his posture remained unbroken, as if discipline itself had kept him upright during the long journey across the Atlantic. For 10 days, Foch had not slept more than an hour at a time. He listened to the engines. He memorized guard rotations. He watched the other prisoners, the young officers who looked to him for reassurance he could no longer give. The transport ship had left Liverpool under secrecy, escorted briefly by anti-submarine patrols before making its solitary run toward the American coastline. And now, as the ship slowed, Foch felt a change in the air. It was not the fear he expected. It was something far more disorienting, a subtle stillness, a quiet that did not belong to war. Make sure you subscribe to WWII Never Told German Files. He stepped closer to the narrow ventilation slit and breathed deeply. There it was again, the faint smell of pine, warm earth, something like harvested corn carried by a gentle breeze. It struck him hard. This did not smell like an enemy coastline. It smelled like countryside, like a place untouched by the storms raging across Europe. Around him, the younger POWs whispered rumors that had taken root during the crossing. Some spoke of American punishment camps hidden in deserts. Others insisted the officers would be interrogated underground, where no Red Cross inspector would ever find them. A few believed they would be put on trial immediately. None of them expected anything humane. They had all seen propaganda images depicting the United States as a mechanized beast fueled by cruelty and ambition. But Foch knew better than to trust rumors, even his own instincts. He kept his face expressionless, his breathing controlled, his thoughts sharp. When the heavy doors finally opened, the burst of sunlight forced many of the prisoners to shield their eyes. Armed guards stood at the entrance, rifles held with firm discipline. But not a single one barked orders or struck a prisoner. Instead, they calmly directed them topside, asking them to move carefully because the stairway was steep. Foch followed the line of POWs into the open air, and then he froze. Below the deck, he had expected to step into a fortress of concrete and wire. Instead, as his vision adjusted, he saw green fields stretching for miles. Grass glowed beneath the sun. Red barns dotted the hillsides, and small farmhouses stood like quiet guardians of the countryside. Beyond the fields, the soft blue outlines of the Blue Ridge Mountains rose and fell like ancient waves. It was nothing like the harsh, industrial America portrayed in German briefings. This felt peaceful, untouched, almost familiar, like the Bavarian countryside he once walked through as a young officer long before ideology clouded Europe. A young American lieutenant approached the prisoners. His uniform was crisp, his stride deliberate, but there was something else. The unmistakable fluency of his German. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Michael Turner, born in Kansas, trained in intelligence. His voice carried neither hostility nor arrogance. It carried purpose. Turner informed them that they would be taken by bus to Camp Crossville, Tennessee, a designated facility for high-ranking prisoners and officers with valuable information. Foch narrowed his eyes, recognizing immediately that an escort officer fluent in German was not accidental. This man was prepared. This transfer was planned. Somewhere in the background of the war, threads had moved long before Foch ever stepped aboard this ship. The prisoners were escorted onto long military buses with covered windows. Foch took the seat nearest to the back, where he could watch both the guards and the changing landscape. The bus rumbled away from the docks, leaving the foggy coast behind. Within minutes, the scenery shifted into wide stretches of open farmland, dotted with tractors, wooden fences, and American families going about their day, as if the war on the other side of the world were just a distant radio broadcast. Foch studied everything: the neat order of the fields, the highways without craters, the small towns untouched by bombings. Every mile felt like a contradiction. How could a nation pouring so much steel into Europe still look so calm? How could a population sending millions of men to war still live with this sense of normalcy? It was not long before Falk noticed another unexpected detail. The American guards were not behaving like typical jailers. Their rifles were carried professionally, but they spoke to each other with a relaxed familiarity. One guard laughed about the heat. Another offered chewing gum to a prisoner who looked on the verge of fainting, not out of pity, but simply because that was what one human did for another on a hot southern day. Falk's jaw tightened. This atmosphere of politeness, this absence of fear, it was disarming. Too disarming. Kindness, he thought, could be a weapon more dangerous than anger. And in this moment frozen between suspicion and uncertainty, the real documentary tension emerged. The war had conditioned him to expect brutality, yet the reality unfolding before him defied every expectation. The bus continued south, winding through rural Virginia. Outside, children waved at the passing convoy, unaware or perhaps uninterested in who the passengers were. To them, it was simply another column of military buses heading inland. Falk watched their faces and wondered what they would think if they knew who sat behind the canvas-covered windows. By the time the buses reached the outskirts of Roanoke, the morning fog had fully lifted. Mountains rose higher. Rivers cut through valleys in silver lines. This land seemed too vast, too untouched, too composed to belong to a nation capable of projecting such power across oceans. Falk leaned his head back and closed his eyes briefly. But even in that short silence, his mind worked through possibilities. Why Tennessee? Why this particular camp? Why an escort officer fluent in German? And one who watched Falk more closely than any other POW. Nothing aligned. Nothing answered the questions, building quietly in his thoughts. And yet, despite all his suspicions, a strange, unwelcome feeling surfaced deep inside him. Curiosity. The kind that pulled at him like a current beneath calm water. He opened his eyes again. The bus turned west toward the Appalachian foothills. A new chapter of his captivity was beginning, a chapter he did not yet understand. And as the convoy moved deeper into America's interior. If you're watching this and stories like these fascinate you, stories of what really happened behind the scenes of World War II, make sure you subscribe to WWII Never Told German Files. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps bring forgotten history back to life. The buses continued their long journey southward, winding through the quiet roads of the American interior. Mennonite farmers guided horse-drawn wagons across fields. Soldiers heading to training camps waved as the convoy passed. None of them looked at the prisoners with hatred. Many didn't look at them at all. To ordinary Americans, life went on, sustained by routines and responsibilities far removed from the global conflict. For General Falk, this indifference was another mystery. In Europe, captives were paraded as trophies, symbols of triumph. Here he felt invisible, as if the war carried no bitterness on American soil. The absence of hostility unsettled him more than open anger ever could. Hours passed, and the landscape changed again. The highways narrowed as they crossed the Tennessee border, replaced by winding rural roads flanked by tall forests and scattered mining towns. Falk noticed signs for Knoxville and Oak Ridge, though he did not yet understand their significance. He wondered why the driver avoided populated areas. Was it protocol? Or was there something the Americans did not want him to see? Turner occasionally glanced back from his seat near the front of the bus. It was a brief look, but always directed at Falk, as if he were studying him, measuring him, waiting for something. By late afternoon, the buses began climbing a long, wooded ridge. The air cooled. Shadows grew longer. And when the convoy turned into a narrow, gravel road marked only by a faded military sign, Falk felt a shift in the atmosphere. A quiet tension, subtle but unmistakable. Guards straightened in their seats. The driver slowed. The entrance to Camp Crossville appeared through the trees, a wooden gate, a guard tower, and a row of modest barracks. But what caught Falk's attention most was not the fortified perimeter he had expected. It was the sight of German prisoners walking freely inside the camp, some tending gardens, others carving wooden toys beneath the shade of tall oak trees. A baseball game played on a dirt field nearby, the crack of a bat echoing across the camp with an almost surreal sense of leisure. Falk's mind stalled between disbelief and suspicion. He had imagined barbed wire and harsh discipline. He found instead a place that resembled a quiet, rural community. He whispered to himself, not realizing the guard nearest him heard the words. This cannot be America. But America, he would soon discover, had many faces. And the one he saw now was only the beginning. The gates of Camp Crossville closed behind the convoy with a muted thud, the kind of sound that marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. General Heinrich Falk stepped off the bus under the long shadow of a Tennessee oak tree, feeling dry earth beneath his boots for the first time since leaving Europe. He studied everything with the sharpness of a man trained to see patterns. The layout of the barracks, the spacing of guard towers, the distance between fences. But the camp defied every expectation he carried across the Atlantic. The guards were alert, but not aggressive. Prisoners walked in small groups, some speaking quietly in dialect from across Germany, others tending vegetable gardens arranged in tidy rows beside the barracks. A few men carried books borrowed from a modest library near the center of the compound. There was a workshop where POWs carved furniture and wooden toys, an area where they played chess beneath the shade, and far in the distance, a baseball field with well-trodden dirt paths. If not for the armed sentries at the perimeter, someone unfamiliar with war might have mistaken the place for a small rural college or a peaceful work community. Falk knew better than to believe first impressions. He reminded himself that comfort could be a tool as sharp as interrogation. 2 guards escorted Falk toward a registration building where officers recorded his information. Inside, the room smelled of polished wood and ink. A clerk asked standard questions about rank, service history, and medical conditions. Falk answered with disciplined precision, offering nothing beyond the expected. Lieutenant Michael Turner appeared again, leaning against the doorway, as if he had been waiting for the moment Falk finished signing the final document. Turner's expression revealed nothing. His eyes, however, lingered briefly on Falk's name and rank, memorizing in silence. Once the formalities ended, Turner nodded for the guards to proceed. They guided Falk out of the office and along a gravel path toward a cluster of officer barracks set apart from the main camp. The air smelled of pine and freshly cut grass. Insects buzzed lazily in the warm afternoon. It was a world away from the chaos of Normandy where Falk had been captured. The officers' quarters were modest wooden buildings, each with a small porch and screened windows. Falk was assigned to a room with a simple bed, a metal desk, and a single bookshelf. A small window overlooked the trees. He had lived in harsher places during the early years of his service. Yet the simplicity unsettled him more than austerity would have. Comfort could weaken vigilance. He placed his cap on the desk and sat down, listening carefully. No shouts, no heavy footsteps, no forced commands from outside. Only the distant thump of a baseball hitting a glove somewhere on the field and the quiet laughter of prisoners at ease. There is something unnatural about peace in a place built for war. Later in the afternoon, Falk was escorted to the mess hall for his evening meal. The hall was large but unadorned, filled with long tables neatly arranged in rows. The food served was plain but ample: potatoes, bread, beans, and slices of roast meat. Falk watched the other prisoners eat with surprising eagerness, some even joking with the guards. He had expected deprivation, hunger, and fear. Instead, he saw men gaining weight, men whose spirits seemed recovered, men who behaved as though captivity had given them something the Reich had taken away: air to breathe. Falk ate slowly, analyzing the room. Every detail mattered. He noticed that guards sat near the exits, but did not hover over the prisoners. He noticed that no one attempted escape, not because of barbed wire, but because the men appeared genuinely uninterested in leaving. Many here were officers, scholars, linguists, musicians. Some probably realized that the war, as they knew it was ending. Others perhaps enjoyed the stability this place offered. Yet Falk sensed something under the surface. Nothing about this camp was accidental. Nothing this comfortable existed without a purpose. After dinner, Turner met him outside and guided him on a brief walk along the perimeter. The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep red. Crickets sang in the grass. Turner walked with the confidence of someone who knew the layout intimately. Falk decided to break the silence. "How long have you been stationed here?" he asked. Turner glanced at him, then back at the path. "Long enough to understand the men who come through these gates." The answer revealed nothing and everything at once. Falk understood now that this lieutenant was not merely an escort officer. He was someone with training, someone with an assignment more complex than guarding prisoners. Turner had observed him with intention since the moment they met, and Falk felt certain this observation began long before they boarded the same ship. As night settled, Turner led Falk toward a cluster of cottages separate from both the barracks and administrative buildings. These structures were built against a slope of thick forest, their porches illuminated by soft lantern light. Falk recognized immediately that these were interrogation cottages. Their isolation, the narrow pathways leading to them, and the deliberate quiet surrounding them all pointed to one purpose: privacy. Turner stopped at the last cottage on the row. "This will be your quarters for tonight," he said simply. Falk studied the lieutenant's face for any hint of motive. Turner's expression remained calm, unreadable. That calmness alone told Falk this man was not easily rattled. Inside the cottage, the furnishings were minimal: just a bed, a small table, and a chair positioned beneath a hanging lamp. A pitcher of water sat beside a basin. A single window faced the trees. The silence pressed against the walls like an unspoken question. Falk sat down on the bed, his thoughts circling the same unidentified concern. Why this treatment? Why this specific camp? Why Turner? Before he could settle into the questions, there was a soft knock at the door. Turner stepped inside without waiting. "There's one more thing before you rest," he said. "Tomorrow's schedule has changed." Falk did not move. "Change how?" Turner stepped closer, his voice steady. "You will meet someone at first light, someone who has been waiting for your arrival." Falk remained silent, but the implication struck like a sudden shift in wind. Someone waiting, someone informed, someone expecting him specifically. The lieutenant continued. "Your capture was anticipated. Certain information became available to us months ago. Your arrival completes a chain of events set in motion far earlier than you realize." Falk's breath stayed controlled, but the edges of uncertainty sharpened. "What information?" he asked. Turner shook his head. "Tomorrow." Without another word, he left the cottage, closing the door softly behind him. For a long time, Falk sat motionless, his mind racing through every possible interpretation. Had he been betrayed? Had German intelligence been compromised? Had someone within his command provided details that pointed directly to him? The quiet in the cottage grew heavier as the night deepened. Outside, the forest whispered with the breeze. Inside, Falk confronted the growing realization that the Americans were not improvising. They were executing a plan. He lay back on the bed, but sleep did not come easily. Every sound, every rustle, every change in the air felt intentional. Falk had survived campaigns that tore through Europe, had walked battlefields littered with ruin, had sat in strategy rooms where the fate of armies was decided. Nothing unnerved him easily. Yet this place, this quiet, peaceful, oddly welcoming place, threatened his composure in ways the battlefield never had. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang softly, a signal for lights out across the camp. The sound echoed through the trees and faded slowly. Falk closed his eyes, still alert, still listening, still wondering who waited for him at sunrise, and why. The first light of July 18, 1944, crept slowly across the hills of Tennessee, brushing the tops of the oak trees in a soft, pale gold. Camp Crossville stirred quietly, its prisoners waking to another day marked not by gunfire or hunger, but by routines that felt almost civilian. In the officers' compound, however, the morning carried a different kind of tension. General Heinrich Falk rose before the guards arrived, already dressed, sitting rigidly at the small table inside the cottage. He had barely slept. Questions had twisted through his thoughts all night. Questions Turner refused to answer. Questions that had traveled with him across the ocean and grown sharper with each passing hour. At exactly 6 a.m., the door opened. Lieutenant Michael Turner stepped inside. "Follow me," he said simply. Outside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of pine sap warming in the rising sun. Turner led Falk along a narrow path through the trees. Birds chirped overhead, their calls echoing through the quiet. It was a peaceful morning, but Falk felt an undercurrent of purpose in every step. The path curved eastward, away from the main camp. After several minutes of walking, a small, isolated building came into view. It was constructed of wood like the others, but reinforced at the corners, with a narrow porch and a single entrance. 2 guards stood outside, their expression serious but not hostile. Turner stopped at the door. "Inside," he said. "Someone is waiting for you." Falk stepped through the entrance. The room was cool and dimly lit, furnished with a table and 2 wooden chairs. A large map of Europe hung on the wall, marked with colored pins and handwritten notes. Papers lay stacked neatly on the table. Seated at the far end was a man Falk had never seen before, middle-aged, clean-shaven, wearing a plain officer's uniform with no visible rank insignia. His eyes were calm, studying Falk with the same measured intensity he had sensed from Turner. "General Heinrich Falk," the man said. "Please sit." Falk lowered himself into the chair, his posture straight. The man folded his hands. "My name is not important," he began. "What matters is that your arrival here is part of an operation that began long before your capture." Falk remained silent, waiting. The man continued. "Months ago, American intelligence received information that certain officers within the Wehrmacht were growing disillusioned with Hitler's strategic decisions. Some wished to act. Others wished simply to survive what they knew was coming." Falk's expression remained stone, but the comment struck close to his own private doubts. Doubts he had never allowed to surface publicly. The man leaned slightly forward. "We were informed that you, General Falk, held opinions that diverged from the party line. Opinions that placed you in danger within your own ranks." Falk held the man's gaze. "By whom were you informed?" "That," the man said quietly, "remains classified." The simplicity of the answer unsettled Falk more than any threat could have. Classified, unknown, hidden behind layers he could not penetrate. The man continued. "What you saw on your journey here, the landscapes, the freedom among prisoners, the order within the camp, was not staged. This country remains largely untouched by the devastation of war, and we intend to keep it that way." He paused, studying Falk's reaction. "However," he added, "your arrival provides us with a unique opportunity." Falk felt the shift in tone. "Opportunity for what?" "To understand," the man answered, "how deeply the fractures run within the German command, and whether those fractures can influence the outcome of this war." For the first time, Falk felt truly off balance. He had expected interrogation about troop positions, supply chains, or strategic plans. But this was something else, something deeper, something far more dangerous. The man reached for a file on the table and slid it toward Falk. Inside were handwritten notes, summaries of conversations, intercepted messages, and details about German officers who had quietly expressed dissent. Some names Falk recognized. Others were unfamiliar. And then he saw something that made his pulse tighten. A page with his own name at the top. Detailed notes beneath it. Dates, places, meetings he believed had gone unnoticed. Falk looked slowly back at the man. "How long have you been compiling this?" "Since April," the man said. "Long before Normandy. Long before your capture." Falk closed the file carefully. "You know more than I expected." "We know enough," the man replied, "to understand that Germany is not as united as it claims." Silence filled the room, heavy and deliberate. Finally, the man stood. "General Falk, you will remain here for several days. You will be given books, writing materials, and whatever reasonable comfort you need. We do not expect immediate answers, but we do expect honesty." He walked toward the door, then paused. "One more thing before I go." Falk waited. "Someone inside your ranks gave us information that led to your capture. Whether it was meant to protect you or eliminate you, only time will tell." With that, he left the room. The door shut softly behind him. For several seconds, Falk remained motionless. The words lingered in the air like distant thunder. Someone inside his command, someone who knew his movements, someone who understood the risk he carried. Friend or enemy, protector or betrayer. The line between the two blurred. After a long moment, Turner re-entered the room. You'll be escorted back to your quarters, he said. You may request anything within reason. Your cooperation will determine what happens next. Falk stood, his mind turning faster than ever. What exactly do you expect from me? Turner met his gaze with calm certainty. We expect the truth. Your truth. Not the party's. Not the Reich's. Yours. Falk stepped past him and exited the building. The morning sun had risen fully now, bathing the camp in warm light. Prisoners walked the grounds with an ease that made captivity seem almost voluntary. A group gathered around the baseball field, watching a game unfold. Laughter drifted through the air. To anyone passing by, the place looked almost peaceful. But to Falk, it felt like standing inside a puzzle with missing pieces. Pieces scattered across oceans and continents, pieces held by allies, enemies, and perhaps someone he once trusted. Back in the cottage, he sat at the small table and breathed slowly. The file remained closed in his memory, but its contents pressed on him with unrelenting weight. Certain meetings, he had assumed, were private were not. Certain conversations were recorded. Certain doubts he had voiced only once had somehow reached American ears. The possibility of betrayal grew sharper. Hours passed. Falk reviewed the fragments of memory that could reveal where the leak originated. A staff officer in Normandy, a liaison in Berlin, a field commander with shifting loyalties. Each possibility had merit, yet none offered certainty. As afternoon faded into evening, a guard delivered a stack of books, a collection of German and English texts, maps, and writing paper. Falk opened the top book and found a folded note inside. 3 words, written in neat English script. You were watched. The message contained no signature, no explanation, no clue, but it offered confirmation. His capture was not coincidence. That night, Falk walked to the window and looked out at the darkening forest. Fireflies flickered near the tree line. The camp was quiet, peaceful, almost serene. Yet beneath that calm lay a web of intentions he had not yet untangled. The war in Europe continued to rage. Cities burned. Borders collapsed. Armies advanced and retreated in violent waves. But here, in a quiet corner of Tennessee, another war played out. One fought with information, with whispers, with unseen alliances. Falk understood now that his role in this war had changed. He was no longer a field commander. He was something else, something between a source, a witness, and a target of forces he did not yet understand. He stepped away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the distant symphony of crickets. The night air drifted through the screen, cool and still. For the first time since his arrival, he felt the weight of uncertainty settle fully upon him. The Americans were patient. Whoever had betrayed him was careful. And the truth, whatever shape it took, waited somewhere beyond the horizon of this quiet mountain camp. The question that followed him into sleep had no answer yet. Was he brought to America to be protected or to be used? The shadows offered no response, and dawn promised only more questions. If you've enjoyed this journey into a hidden corner of World War II history, remember to share this video, like it, and subscribe to WWII Never Told German Files. And please comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your support keeps these untold stories alive.